adjusting your schedules to be here. For the special council meeting of May the 15th, attendance, Councillor Williams and Councillor Culhane are not here with us right now. Number 3, disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. Anyone have anything to disclose? The following items will not be dealt with at this meeting: moment of prayer, meditation, public meetings, reading and confirmation of minutes, deputations, correspondence, consent items, council information matters, new business, motions, notice of motions, announcements. I have a motion to go into committee of the whole to hear and consider reports, passing recommendations and resolutions with myself and the chair. Moved by Councillor Millette, seconded by Councillor Sandison. All in favor is carried. Councillor Williams has arrived. 8A, reports. The agenda shall include under reports items that warrant individual attention from council. 8A1, tax rates. Director of Finance, Treasurer's Report number DF 2019-16. And a resolution is that council approve the municipal tax rates as outlined in the Director of Finance Treasurer's Report number DF 2019-16, and that bylaw number 2019-76 be rescinded, and that a bylaw to establish municipal tax rates for the City of Belleville be prepared for Council's consideration. Get this on the floor. Moved by Councillor McCaw, second by Councillor Sandison. Director Cousins, on this joyous day that we get to come by and take a look at this, I wonder, I know we have your report, but in the interests of those who may be watching either now or later on, I wonder if you can just sort of summarize the events that have brought us to today's meeting, as well as what decision City Council has to make today.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have Carol Hines with me as well. I'm not Mark Fleur. I borrowed my last name tag. I'll kind of give you a bit of history, but when we get into the details of the issue, I'll turn this over to Carol. Just for Council's consideration and information, we met on April the 2nd, and we dealt with the operating budget. At that time, once the operating budget was done, we created we had a spreadsheet up on the wall or on the screen, which is basically Schedule 1 to your agenda. We passed the tax rates based on the information that we had at that time on April the 2nd. As you know, since then, we did not have the education rates on April the 2nd. They were presented or passed by the province on April the 11th. Yes, so we updated our Schedule 1. What we've done in standard practice is that municipalities will submit their draft municipal tax rates to the province, the Ministry of Finance, through OPTA, Ontario Property Tax Authority, Taxation Authority, for basically verification of what we've been doing and in our interpretation of legislation, that what we've done is correct. At that time, we submitted the information verbally to OPTA after Council passed, after April the 2nd, after Council passed their draft tax rates. We identified our tax rates to them, and at that time they said they could not give us final verification of our municipal tax rates until they reviewed the provincial budget and all the matters with respect to property tax matters. Since that time, with only an acknowledgement that our tax rates were okay, we came to Council on April 30th and passed the municipal tax rates along with the provincially legislated education rates. On May the 9th, which was last Thursday, OPTA said we're open for business basically, and we filed our tax rates with them. They immediately got back to us on late Thursday that there was an issue with the multi-res tax rates. And what had happened, we had predicted that the based on Schedule 1, that the municipal tax rates would increase 2.62%, except for multi-res, which was going up 3.3%. And basically, that is not in agreement with the province's legislation or makeup to say that multi-res shouldn't be experiencing an increase. So we looked at it again, they looked at it again. We are, just for everybody's information, we are one of 44 municipalities out of 444 that have a multi-res tax ratio above 2. And that creates a different way of calculating tax rates, because you cannot pass any increase in the budget in the core onto multi-res property taxes. So we created and multi-res was experiencing a decrease in their assessment from 2018 to 2019. And we get this, for everybody's information, we get the assessment information mid-December for 2019, and then we go through it. We have staff to go through it, basically property by property, and having a look at it. And when we were looking at it, we found a couple of big issues with respect to, in a comparison between 18 and 19. There's a couple of large high-rises in Belleville that have been successfully converted, or will be, to condos. And when a multi-res property is converted to condos, their property taxes leave the multi-res property class and go to residential, which is significantly lower than the multi-res. So we proceeded with what the information we had, and we levied our taxes based on the information that we had in existence at that time. Again, so multi-res had decreased in assessment, and I cannot remember any time that the multi-res had decreased over the years. So we proceeded to say, okay, that's just an anomaly for this year. It should have happened a year ago, but now it's happening. So we really didn't expect the multi-res property class to decrease in assessment. And the reason we passed it on April 30th, or council passed it on April 30th, is that we have to print our tax bills, and we have to, by legislation, have them in the property's owners 21 days before the due dates. And our due dates were the end of June and September. So we had to have the final tax bills printed sometime in May, early May, so that we could meet the deadline of submission or forwarding to the property owners their final tax bill. So we spent, again, when Opta reviewed our rates on May the 9th, we spent all day Friday, the 10th, Carol and Susan and Brandon and myself, and in basically it was not a short conference call with Opta. It was actually probably about 4 hours long that we spent Friday afternoon trying to get this issue solved. So we spent, again, long hours doing a lot of information, passing along a lot of information from Opta to us and from us to Opta. We were obligated by legislation to reduce the multi-res property or tax ratio from above 2 to 2. So we did that. We went from, I think we outlined it in here. We started at 2.51 in 2016, and now we are down to 2.39. So we're getting to 2. So we've done everything that, according to what our legislation or what the provincial legislation says. We addressed the issue of the multi-res decrease in assessment. We notified Opta at that time when we noticed it, and we did our calculations, And that's why at that time their tax ratio or tax rate was increasing more than the other property classes. So at the end of the day, we got it all solved with Opta and late Friday afternoon. And the Schedule 2 would be the new municipal tax rates that council would have to approve today so that we can meet our deadlines for printing and due dates. If we prolong the agony and nothing happens, we're not in compliance basically with the Ministry of Finance. If we have to go back and do a lot of other what-ifs, we will not meet the printing deadline, and our due dates will probably go into July, maybe August and September of this year, and that would cause considerable cash flow issues with the city. We would probably not have sufficient funds. We have quarterly school board payments, etc., and so we might have to even reduce our investments to meet our cash flow at that time. So if you have any other questions, technical issues, Carol and I are here to answer you. So.
Well, thank you, Director Cousins. And just, to go on the record as well to let people know, while I was unavailable on Friday, I did have a conversation with Director Cousins and Ms. Hines to become aware of the matter. I then was in contact with all members of council before today to get direction on the fact that we would have to have a special council meeting in order to make a decision and provide direction before the end of today. Also, that we have a choice to make here. We have to either find a way of the choice is this is not an increase in spending of the budget. It is a determination of how it's spread over our tax basis. And so we either have a choice of increasing the amount that is spread over or reducing our spending by $653,000 per year. I took a straw vote temperature from council so that we can provide some direction so Mr. Cousins could provide a report for us. That report wasn't able to be completed until Monday because, as far as I understand, the OPTA website went down on Friday, and they weren't able to finalize some of that information. So we apologize for the late notice on your agenda packages. You received them yesterday. But we had to have a starting point today, so we can have some discussion. Mr. Director Cousins, I wanted to just go on the fact that prior to this year, municipal councils were directed to reduce their multi-residential ratios down to the 2.0. But we were permitted to gradually make those reductions, correct? And so what has happened this year that suddenly the scheduled plan of gradual reductions in the ratios was not permitted?
That's through the chair to your worship. We did reduce it, but from down to 2.23. We also looked at reducing it to 2. But when you're above 2, you are restricted in the amount of taxes that you can levy to the multi-res. When you get down to 2, that all changes, so any budget increase can be levied across all property classes on an equal basis. But once you're above 2, you are restricted into the amount that you can levy, core levy, to the multi-res. Now we did that, but when they factored in when Opta factored in our assessment decrease in multi-res, it resulted in an increase in the multi-res property class right off the bat by 4%.
So property owners now that are converting apartments into basically it's condos, they're exacerbating this for us, is my understanding. But the reality is, you had negotiations after we approved our budget on April the 2nd, and you gave us estimates. You had discussions with OPTA, and I'm reading from your report, and where it's reported that the city noted that the higher increase was counterintuitive to the provincial government's position and requested confirmation that we had applied the regulation correctly. And while the OPTA representative admitted there was little detail available to aid in interpretation of the regulation, he confirmed that what we had passed on to the multi-residential class was correct. And then, so something changed between that conversation, where you then prepared bylaws for council, which was approved on April the 30th. And then since then, between April 30th and May the 9th, something's changed. And then now suddenly we are having to scramble to deal with this. Can you confirm, Director Cousins, for me that there is no additional spending in the budget versus what was approved by council on April the 2nd?
You are correct. Your worship, we're not increasing the budget. We're not making any changes to the operating budget. At the end of the day, we are still levying $101,354,200. It's just across the different property classes. It's just the allocation of that amount.
Right. And then, and so really the choice, the stark choice for us is either to reallocate that in a way which will increase the residential tax increase from about 2.62% to about 3.2%, or reduce spending by $650,000.
You are correct. If we had to reduce the overall budget by $656,000, that has to be out of the core. It's not an area rated issue. It all has to come out of the core.
And then just in terms of for next year, because I know that in the last paragraph of the report, you suggest that this will most likely arise again in 2020 as further assessment reclassifications and appeals are underway. If we, so basically what would be happening this year is that the tax increase would be applied equally across the core. Does that correct the problem for next year, or will we be in the same position again if we continue to allow conversions of multi-residential properties, as well as any other provincial policy decisions?
I would say yes, because again, we have to get down to 2, and then we can levy the core and all other taxes across the other property classes on an equal basis, and multi-res will become part of the, will be not restricted. We can now pass that on to them.
Can
sorry.
No, I thank you for the answer. Can we get? Have you done any financial analysis of what would happen if we got down to the 2 now, or we get down to the 2 next year, so that we no longer have this restriction?
Yes, we did a lot of what ifs on Friday afternoon. If we went to 2, the residential would, for municipal purposes, would increase 4.5%.
A tax would this year would be a 4.5% increase.
Correct.
Above the 3.2 that we would have to deal with on the corrective action now. So to fix it permanently, but likely next year we should probably plan for that correction at that point, and you know, try to deal with this as responsibly as we can. All right, thank you very much. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on this? Councillor Millette.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Cousins. Sorry to have you go out having to juggle this bag of snakes, Mr. Cousins, on your very last day. But we also have the impending impacts of the cuts in EMS and health unit and others that we're seeing at the county level. Those impacts have yet to been passed on down to us. So In your estimation, are we going to see that compound the pain in 2020 as well?
Director Cousins?
Maybe next year when we finally get the numbers, but there is a mention. This change, I should say, is only $25 increase in the residential on an annual basis. When all the provinces decided, I know there are some municipalities are talking about levying another tax bill this year based on all the decisions when all the numbers come down from the province. If Council decides to reduce the core budget by $650,000 to get back to the original tax rates of and a 2.62%, we'd have to find $656,000 in the budget. But when EMS and the health unit and they start sending us a bill for the downloading from the province, we're going to have to issue another tax bill.
Yeah, that was my point exactly, because if we accept the $656,000 cut, those impending cuts are coming our way, or at least our impending share of increasing to cover those cuts. So that's my concern here.
Yeah. And if I just on following up on Councillor Millette, can you just clarify, Director Cousins, the average of $25 that you had talked about in terms of this being a change? Can you, just so that it's reported accurately, how do we determine the average, and how do we determine that average tax impact between what we had previously approved and what the modification is today?
Okay, I'll refer to Schedule 3. We had used an average, and this is just the residential side that we're talking about here, which is Schedule 3. In 2019, I'll just give Belleville Urban a discussion here. And for municipal taxes, Belleville Urban, they paid almost $3,600, which is when the fourth column over. When we met back in April and passed on April the 30th, that amount had increased to $3,688.21. Once this new one is approved, or the revised version, the municipal portion of a $250,000 assessment for Belleville Urban would go to $3713.23, which would be an increase of $25 based on the original passage on April 30th.
So and then the average assessment would be based on a $250,000 assessed home.
Correct.
Right. So if you have a home that's assessed at below 250, the impact would be less. If you have a home that's assessed at above 250, the impact would, on average, be higher.
Correct.
Okay. I just want to get that clear because we all get the phone calls about the fact that what we said. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Couple comments and questions. So really, what we're dealing with isn't a cut. It's a reallocation of where we're going to gather the taxes. I thought I heard somebody say that there was going to be potentially a 4% increase. So the current rate for residential is 2.62? Is that what I heard?
Director Cousins?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So following on the discussion then, have we been, I thought we said we had been mandated to reduce it to 2. So that occurs in this budget, if approved? When does that occur?
Through the chair, Councillor Sanderson, we can levy an equal amount from year to year as long as your multi-res, you're working to 2.
Okay,
to a point 2.0, we are not there. We are at 2.23, but on a going forward basis, it would be wise to get rid of this above 2 tax ratio for multi-res. Go to 2. That means that any budget increase can be levied equally across all property classes including multi-res.
Yeah, I
And
understand.
we're one of 44 in Ontario that are experiencing this issue.
Yeah. So I understand. And so what were we at before we came to 2.23? Were we at 3.3?
We started in 16 when the legislation came, or the legislation started in 17. We were at 2.51.
Yeah.
Last year, we were at 2.4 something, and now we're at 2.23.
Yeah. What were we on the original budget submission for 2019?
2.23.
So I'm lost. If we were at 2.23 and we're saying we want to go to 2.23, what's changed?
Well,
The allocation across the property classes of the budget of $101 million.
Okay, sorry, I asked
Sorry.
the wrong question. So the 2.3, is that specific to multi-res?
Yes, existing multi-res. I should point out that any new construction in multi-res property class pays residential tax rates.
1-to-1.
So anything new since 2016 that's added to the multi-res property class pays municipal tax rates at residential.
Okay. So if this budget gets approved, or I'm sorry, if these changes get approved today, what is the percentage for multi-res and what is the percentage for residential?
I'll refer you to Schedule 2.
It's an eye test.
Actually, it shows on Schedule 3, too. Right at the very bottom, you'll see residential rural, which is farms and managed forests, multi-res, commercial industrial. The multi-res municipal tax rate is going down 4.22%.
So I'm having trouble reading the document.
Well, it's a very complex issue, Councillor
sorry.
Sanderson.
No, it's
I
an
have
eye, it's an eye test. So,
Well, but it's also
Yeah.
it's also not made easy because, as Director Cousins has said, we have to juggle a bunch of different properties within the multi-residential property tax class. We have new builds after, what year was it, the new ones?
2006.
So everything that was constructed after 2006 pays on a 1-to-1 ratio with residential. Previous to 2006, we had different ratios because of the different level of services that those properties were using. You know, more people living on a property have a more intense use of services than, for example, a home. You may have 3 people living on a property that own a single attached home, and they're using services and infrastructure for the city. But if you have an apartment building with 100 people in that building, there's a much more intense use. So the original idea about the multi-residential tax rate was to recognize that these properties are using heavier services. The province has now made a change in that, and they're saying that you cannot use a higher tax rate than a 2-to-1 ratio for multi-residential. And they gave us time to reduce that rate. As Director Cousins spoke about, through the negotiations and the discussions, the province said that we were correctly applying it. But when we pulled out the conversion properties, now there's a smaller base, and they're suggesting that the tax increase is higher than for everybody else. And so as a result, their interpretation is causing us to have this new $56,000 problem.
So I do understand the complexity of the problem, and the issue that's before us, I understand, has been inflicted on us. The last question I have is in regards to the challenges that we've seen to assessments on multi-residential properties, which has also contributed to this issue. We've got, I think, through the budget process, we saw something in excess of 100 outstanding claims on us. Mm-hmm. So have we built in anything into the budget process to, protect ourselves in the upcoming years?
Good question.
Yes, we have. We talked about that during the budget where we increased the allowance by $1 million. Yes.
Thank you.
And just to be clear as well, as we go around the question, 656,000 is for this year. If we determine we wanted to fix this problem permanently this year, it would be a higher number than 656. So I think, you know, after this is we make our decisions for this year, direction should be provided to staff that in next year's budget, it come back with a solution to bringing it down to the 2.0 so that we don't have to deal with this again in a worse situation. Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Director Cousins. In terms of where the buck stops, is this it for this? I mean, we are obviously caught off guard. This is the situation we hate to be in, especially when our year end is December 31st. I know you and I have talked about that. This is probably one of those situations we'd like to have on March 31st. We might have had some more info. Is this it? I mean, this is the direction. We can't lobby for, you know, a multi-year where we're going to get this fixed. You know, the other 44 municipalities, are they looking at this and saying the same? There's no way to get around this, given who we've got in government right now?
Director Cousins.
Through the chair, Councillor Williams, I think over the years, the multi-res property owners in Ontario have been lobbying the province for this whole issue. In a lot of like I said, only 44 of a tax ratio for multi-res, about 4. The other 400 are happy because they can pass on any increases equally to all the other property classes. But when you're above 2, you're restricted. You can't do any more. So on a going forward basis, we are restricted now if we don't get to 2. The last line of the report, where the multi-res as their core amount is set at $5.1 million in accordance, and we can't change that.
And just to follow up on Councillor Sanderson's question, because I think that was an important one, we're getting routinely assessments in, and sometimes they're costing us 1 or 2 a year, and that's significantly higher than 650. Where would those normally come out of? If those assessments come out, what part of the budget are we pulling that kind of money
Talking
out?
with the appeals on?
Yes.
Okay. Director
On
Cousins.
appeals. So appeals from MPAC, and, you know, we've got, let's say, a couple of big box or, you know, just other commercial that come through, and it is an impact of this magnitude. What have we done on that kind of decision in the past?
Director Cousins.
To the chair, Councillor Williams, over the last couple of years, we've been increasing our allowance for that. When the appeal comes in and they are successful, and like I said yesterday, it does take a long time for it to get through the queue. So when we actually have to refund the money due to an incorrect assessment or a successful appeal of their assessment, it always goes down, never goes up, then we are obligated to repay the property owner the amount that we had basically overbilled according to the assessment. I believe the year before, in 2017, the amount we refunded was $4.3 million, and we had built up our reserve enough, or our allowance enough to cover that. On a going forward basis, and you'll see it in the operating issues in the future, like I said, 13% of our assessment is under appeal, and it's some huge commercial establishments in the city.
I think, you know, the point is this is a big issue and we've got to deal with it. And I think having a reserve is important. I guess my question is, in this situation, can we look at that reserve to look at this amount?
So just before Director Cousins answers, the property tax appeal process is an expected one on our part. We've had this happen regularly. Property tax owners have the right to appeal, and they've been successful, and we are not alone. Other municipalities deal with this issue, particularly along the 401 corridor, where companies are coming in based only on a contingency, so they will not charge you to appeal your property taxes, and they will receive a percentage of whatever reduction you get going forward. So it's really difficult. This is the first time this has happened, and so and if we fix it in next year's budget, it's done. We don't have to deal with it it's not an ongoing basis. So when we talk about using reserves for the property tax appeal versus this issue, I think they're apples and oranges. I would be very concerned about using reserve funds that we've put in for property tax appeals to fix this one-time problem, a problem which has come because of the provincial government's change in the interpretation of the tax ratios. Again, we can deal with this year if we wanted to, but that would be an increased amount than 656,000. Perhaps the best thing to do is deal with the 656 this year, and then next year deal with the remainder. But I'll ask Director Cousins to answer that question about the reserve amounts available to cover the $656,000 shortfall.
Yes, through the chair of the council. Our recommendation as part of this report is to basically keep the budget, the operating budget that you approved on April the 2nd, the same amount, all these issues. We're just distributing the taxes to the various property classes based on the current legislation. If council wished and needed to find the $656,000 on the core, we would have to reopen the operating budget, go through it, however long you want to take, and find $656,000. Now, with respect to using a reserve, it's for years I've been saying don't use one-time funding to soften the blow, or if we had to find one-time funding somewhere in our reserves or our allowances to solve this issue of $656,000, because next year you're going to have to refine the money again.
And just how much, can I just ask, how much is in that reserve right now?
3.2 million.
And like we said, we have 13% of our current properties in review. Do we know how much that represents, the 13%?
We don't know where they'll settle.
That's right. Okay, just another question as I just going through this, and I understand the complexity of this, and I also know the taxpayer, and they're not going to look at this the same way perhaps if we have the information we do, and they're just going to see it as another increase, and this is bad. And a lot of people, as we've said, as we went through the whole budget in the one day or how many days we did, was that there are people who have said enough is enough and they can't afford this. So my concern as a councillor is, no matter what the reason, passing this on to the taxpayer is not something I'm really privy to do without exhausting every other part of this. And that's why when I was a rookie councillor going through the budget, I wanted to go through 77 pages because I wanted to see if there was room. And I think do I want to sit here for 7 days? Absolutely not. But I guess the first question, have we, because I know we've done this, and I feel like we've Director Hines, we've looked at this as well. Have we looked or made even a little look to the budget to say, is there room at all for that 650? I know that Councillor Carr will bring up that originally we asked for a 1.5% increase, and we asked staff to come back again for that. Something I will, and I did talk about this when I was questioning the budget in those 77 pages when I was up here, was I did see a big difference between what was actual cost last year and what was budgeted this year, because what I saw was a practice for all departments was that there was a budget increase from the budget in 2018 to the budget in 2019. Therefore, I did see that there was room if we looked at actuals at a 1.5% increase. Again, I'd like to go with this to discussion. I'm not going to make any motions right now, but I'm just pointing that out, that I would like to make sure that we've exhausted a reserve discussion, even if it was, half reserve this year and half into cuts of some sort or a combination. But my preference, just for the taxpayer is going to be that we don't touch that rate. They're not going to understand that, and I don't think it's fair. At the same time, this is tough, and it's not anyone's fault. I just think it's something we have to exhaustively talk about today.
Well, it's some good questions, Councillor Williams, but I have a question for you. You know, we had a chance to go through line by line each item in the budget, and one of the differences between the corporate world and people that are private taxpayers in Belleville and the city of Belleville is that we're not allowed to go over budget. We're not allowed to have a deficit budget. And when departments are forecasting for their future, they have to keep that in mind. And so when they build in some items saying that, you know, this is the average, but this might break down, and these tools may not be available, or we may have to deal with it. For example, none of us in April were concerned about flooding of Lake Ontario, and now we are. And resources have to be put towards that. If we have a budget that's passed and we have not flexibility to be able to cover those things, what does the City of Belleville do in that situation when we're not allowed to have a deficit budget? Yeah, what do you propose that we do?
Well,
when
I understand that when it came to last year, I know that Manager Reid was saying that they come back to us in November, right? So, I mean, that's the key. And hey, I'm not pretending here that this is easy. But I think, you know, when we talked about yesterday, I think it was you that mentioned sometimes we have to look at cuts. It's not always about adding certain things, and sometimes we have to look at revenue. And I think this is an unfortunate circumstance that's been thrust upon us. This is not, like I said, anyone's fault. I just want to make sure before we just say, hey, the only thing we can do to the taxpayers is increase your taxes, I want to make sure we've had the discussions that we've exhausted this and we've put the best effort in, and hey, this is no other option, and we're sorry.
But let me come back to my question. November. City staff come to us and say that they have a problem because we did not leave any room. We don't have the ability to deal with it unless we send out a supplemental tax bill. So we say, you know something, we made a mistake. We did not estimate correctly for the year's operation, so now we need an extra $200 per taxpayer in order to cover that. You know, Councillor Millette raised the issue, and we're going to go in our order. Councillor Millette raised an issue about the provincial government cutbacks to outside agencies that we deal with. And what happens in July or August if they come back to us and say that the amount that we had asked you and you funded is not sufficient, and you are mandated now to provide that extra funding. The City of Toronto is already speaking about a supplemental tax bill this summer that they're going to send out because their taxes are done and they've got a shortfall. I believe the last time that a supplemental tax bill was given in the City of Belleville was 1959. And that supplementary tax bill was back when councils were elected on a year-by-year basis, and it was designed to fund the Belleville McFarlands going to the World Championships. And they did a second assessment, and they sent out bills to cover the costs of the Belleville McFarlands going and being successful in the World Championships. And I believe that the council was completely changed over that following year. So when we talk about supplemental assessments, people want to know what the bill is at the beginning of the year as they go, but you know, that's something to think about as we talk about saying that we're going to reduce budgets, and then we'll see how it goes during the year and we can adapt later on. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. Because this is an important budget question, I'm going to ask for a recorded vote, so I can give the clerk the heads up now. I want to go back to the pre-budget phase. And Councillor Williams referred to it, and Council passed a motion with a 1.5% increase, and that was the target. Going back 5 years ago, that didn't occur, and Council at the time said that the budget increase, the operating budget increase, was too much, sent it back to staff. Staff came back with a $2 million reduction. And I understand budget estimates. I do work in government in my other life. So I get it, and I understand that it's different in the private sector. I've never worked in the private sector, so I'm familiar from the government side. However, had we been presented with a budget target of 1.5%, then this discussion would be pretty straightforward and pretty easy. But the fact that we had a budget presented to us at over 5% draft puts council in a difficult position that when things like this arise. And I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, and I appreciate the finance department. They have done yeoman's work in terms of preparing budgets and certainly being agile as the provincial regulations change. I know we had discussions about multi-res last term. In fact, through planning, we had a number of applications where apartment building owners were coming to us and asking for condominium status for this exact purpose, is to basically see a reduction in their property taxes and issue them as a single residential. And there's a heavy lobby in the GTA, and clearly that is replicating itself across the province. Having said that, if we were in a better position and had a draft budget at the day that was at the target that council had set, this would be a much easier discussion. So I think I'm not going to support the motion. $656,000 can be found and not cripple the municipal government. And I recognize that there are some things that are beyond our control as far as the province goes. And I know there was talk about a supplementary tax bill. Well, I have no problems whatsoever pointing to the provincial government as to the reason for a secondary tax bill. We are creatures. We've heard it time and time again. Municipal governments exist because the province allows us to exist, and we'll just have to follow along in the circumstances that they present to us. But at the same time, and until we get clear direction on where things are going, we are tasked with making decisions. And so therefore what we need to be doing is making decisions based on this organization. And I'm just going to say that had we hit the target, this would be a different situation. I recognize that $25 is not a lot, but $25 on top of $91 makes a difference. So we have to look at it collectively. The average sale price, according to real estate last month, was $362,000. So the average assessment, I think, may be a little bit low at $250,000. So when you're talking about dollars and cents and people meeting the bottom line, we have to be reasonable and we have to be prudent. And I think if we had been a little bit more prudent at the front end, it'd be different today. So I won't be supporting the resolution.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly, do you have any questions or comments? No? Councillor McCaw?
No real questions. I just have grave concerns about what vital services we're prepared to cut for $650,000. That's just my thought on it. You know, start talking about what you'd like to cut.
All right. Thank you. Councillor Thompson, any questions or comments?
Yeah, I got a couple. When is the latest the outside agencies can pass on their budget shortfalls to us? Is it now, or can they do that in August, September?
They would do that whenever they have a shortfall, you know, so, or when they budget. I'll ask Director Cousins, but they've submitted to us their 2019 budgets. We have funded our obligations, and we are current with that, and there's a schedule for some of them in terms of how often we pay. The Health Board got some good news. I know Councillor Sanderson and Councillor Kelly. The Health Board is going through a forced reorganization across the province, and am I missing anyone else on the Health Board besides, just before okay, thank you. I didn't want to omit anyone by mistake. But the Health Board has received assurances from the provincial government that any shortfalls this year in their reorganization would be covered by the provincial government. So we now know that we will not be seeing a supplemental from them. But Hastings County, Quinte Conservation, the library, and other organizations that we deal with as, you know, I want to say we're third parties with them. We have obligations to fund their decisions of their boards in terms of those budgets. And if they came to us in September or October, we would be required to do so. So Director Cousins can add to that, but basically up until the end of the year, we don't know if we'll be getting extra ones. We've never had that happen. You know, typically their budgets have been sufficient, but they're dealing now with provincial downloads. Director Cousins?
You are correct, Your Worship. When you talked about EMS, I can tell you that Hastings County used $500,000 out of their reserves to cover the provincial budget shortfall.
Okay, my second question then is, have we looked at our budget, our capital and operating budget to see if there's any of the projects that we have on the docket that was going to be needing federal, provincial funding that we're not going to get. Could we possibly take those projects out of our capital project and reduce our taxes?
So the taxation amounts that we had budgeted in the capital budget, Director Cousins, do you know if we've got any news about projects that are not proceeding that we were funding through tax?
Through the Chair of Council, I'm not aware of anything. I should point out that the $656,000 that we're talking about here is in the core. So we would have to reopen the budget, look at the capital budget, all the projects in the capital budget, all 90 some of them, that council approved in February, and you'd either have to, and then you'd have to look at the column called funded from taxation and come up with 656,000. So that means 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever projects. And if you want to, that's council decision, but you've already passed that in February. With respect to operations, again, we just dealt with this on April the 2nd, and if you want to reopen the budget, that's what we would have to do, and we'd have to go line by line, issue by issue, and we could reopen the budget and sit here tomorrow afternoon, and you tell us what you want to do, and where you go.
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned, well, more than a little concerned about all tax increases. And as one of the councillors said, the assessment of $250,000, I don't think there's any house in Belleville that we can buy for $250,000 anymore. I live in a pretty modest house, and I hope mine's worth more than $250,000. Mine's pretty small. So that tax increase is definitely going to be more than $119. My last question, the 2 multi-residential apartments that are going up on the west end of Belleville, are they already residential rated, or are they multi-resident and they'll be fighting
So since 2006,
Yeah.
every new multi-residential property is at a 1-to-1 ratio.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Millette, you had something you wanted to add, or?
Yeah, I'm not one who wants to pass on a tax increase to anyone either. But as Mr. Cousins pointed out, to reopen, a lot of these projects have already been tendered. A lot of them have already begun. $25. I'm not below shouting from the rooftops where these effects are coming from. This is not something of our doing. It's provincial regulations that are hobbling us from collecting a fair tax rate at the same time when these condos or owners of these apartments, and I see it monthly at landlord and tenant board hearings, where tenants are coming to the board to say, the owners of these buildings are putting us out of our apartments. They're largely seniors who can't afford to pay condo fees and all of a sudden become condo owners. They're renting in a lot of these high occupancy towers because that's all they can afford. It falls squarely on the feet of the provincial government and this formula, and the owners of these apartment complexes that are being condominiumized. So, yeah, while I don't like to increase taxes either, I don't mind pointing the finger at why and how, and I think $25 across the board, or if you want to use Councillor Carr's formula, yeah, it's going to be that as well as what we approved. But tell me where taxes are going down anywhere else, and I'll jump right in.
Okay. Councillor Sanderson?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So I would like to just build on Councillor Millette's comments. We, as a group, approved a budget some 4 weeks ago, and we went through it line by line, and we've taken some actions on pop-ups. We added in 150,000 We found $600,000 to buy the cabaret building. We had a housing summit where we made decisions about reducing development charges. So while as a collective group, we didn't all perhaps get the things in the budget that we wanted, at the end of the day, we walked away with an operating budget that we thought was the right decision for the city. And when we consider the organization and the tasking that we gave them with the 1.5%, I can remember Director Cousins telling us that pre-budget approvals was one of the key contributors that we weren't able to arrive at the 1.5%. But what that also said was that council had made decisions that they felt were worthwhile in terms of expending money in advance of the budget setting process. So as I consider everything that we've been discussing, I think it's unreasonable to think that we should reopen the operating budget, and I will be supporting the tax increase.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a couple comments, and I'm not for tax increases as well, but serving on the Hastings Prince Edward Health Unit and EMS, I'm on that committee, and I'm on the Conservation Committee, and I'm on the Library Committee. And with the government in Toronto, I feel there's a big responsibility in what they're doing and the downloading on municipalities. I do know it was Easter weekend. An email went out to Quinte Conservation that there would be some more downloading or budget decreases there. That was Easter Thursday. Public Health was notified on a Friday at 3 o'clock that an email came out of Toronto that this area, Hastings, would be shortfalled over $500,000. I know that as a member of the Library Committee, shortfall there. So we're seeing this, and yesterday was the OPP out $46 million in their budget, and it seems like the Ford government in Toronto has a weekly email that they're putting more on the municipalities. And as Brian Cousin touched on, there's 44 to the 440 in the province, municipalities affected by this. And I don't like to see tax increases, but I think to go back and look at find 656,000 with projects either underway or in the process of being underway with the budget that was passed earlier this year might not be the wrong thing. I'll be supporting the tax increase. It's unfortunate, but I think we have to look to our friends west of the 401 to see where these, and this is, we don't know what's ahead of us. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor McCaw. Oh, sorry, Councillor Carr.
Thank you. I'm not going to belabor. I just want to assure Council and you, Mayor, that the Belleville Public Library has the funds to operate this year. We will not be coming back to the city for any additional funds. Our core provincial funding that we've received, and it's been consistent for 20 years, remains untouched, and the impact in terms of the library services interlibrary loan, which doesn't directly impact us in a significant way, but I've confirmed with the CEO just this morning that our budget is intact and we will not be asking for any additional funds.
Well, but just be careful, because the provincial government is changing the rules around development charges and what the public library can use to fund some of its acquisitions and other upgrades. And so I'm not suggesting that's going to put you into a deficit, but those rules are changing as we speak, and we don't know what else will change. You know, back in April, when the provincial government released their budget, I made comments that on the appearances, we looked pretty good. But we had to wait for the second shoe to drop in terms of what the actual details are, and that's where we're at. So
and I appreciate that, and actually, CAO Pross and myself have a meeting with MPP Todd Smith next Tuesday to talk about library services. We're going to get an idea of what's coming down, how that's going to impact the local service here. And then that evening, next Tuesday, we'll be briefing the full library board, but certainly we're going to be cautious as things move forward.
Good, thank you. Councillor Williams?
Thank you, Your Worship, and just through yourself to Director Hines and Cousins. The way the budget ends on March 31st, on December 31st, the winter control budget this year is set up at 2.256. Is that done, or is that including, does that kind of cover both ends of that year?
Director Cousins?
It covers, certainly the whole winter period within the calendar year, so certainly January to March and then October to December.
Okay, and so the bulk of that would be already accounted for from, well, again, depending if we get snow in December. Do we know where that budget ended up right now? Because it was about a $256,000 increase over last year.
You're talking about the 2018 budget or the 2019
well,
budget?
our year end is December 31st.
Yes, so the 2018 year-end budget would have included all of 2018.
So I'm talking about winter this year, if we're seeing anything that's...
So we're only halfway through the winter of 2019. So
yeah, I hope we're not getting any snow today, but...
No, well, hopefully not, but with the weather this year, who knows? But
no,
I think...
So what I'm getting at is I'd just like to see, if we looked at, in the budget where we're looking at, and again, I'm not pretending we're going to start opening it up, but, winter control, tree maintenance, some things that we had gone through before would be ones that I wouldn't want to go into library, I wouldn't want to go into capital. The two questions, the main ones I'd have would be budgets that have already been used significantly, like winter control. And the second question I would have is on capital that's already been allocated. So capital projects that we've already tendered and we've gotten submissions in. Are we under in any of those? And then for winter control again, based on, and I don't think you'll have the answer right now, but if we look at a budget historical to last year, was it a lesser budget? Was it more? Did we save $200,000-300,000? I'm just kind of looking for
That's good. So I don't know if Director Cousins or soon-to-be Director Hines remembers in the 2018 year end, so the last year's budget, how did we do based on projected expenses for winter control and the actual? Does anyone remember? In that,
Sorry.
do you remember, Director Cousins?
I believe we were over in 2018.
We expended more than we had planned.
That's
and
correct.
we have a reserve account to
That's
allow
correct.
for that year end because we don't know how to predict. And so this year, we're only halfway through that budget cycle. I'm not sure if anyone can predict what the winter will be like in November and December in particular, but sometimes even as early as October in terms of freezing rain. And we have a budget and we still have reserves that we pay into to pull out in years that we go over.
I'd just like to comment further with respect to winter control that we also group flood management within that area. So any of our flood costs will also have to be funded this year as well. So either through the operating budget for 2019 or if over, we'll have to draw from the reserve for those.
And so far with that flood budget, are we over that budget this year?
Can't comment yet.
We can't count.
It's too early, yeah. So we've accessed some resources from it in preparation for Lake Ontario, but we won't know until May the 25th what the true extent. We can't predict even. We're thinking that we're hoping that by May 25th we can have an understanding of what the peak level for Lake Ontario will be. But again, the challenge is that Lake Erie is affecting Lake Ontario levels, and while they have increased some of the discharge from Lake Ontario at the Iroquois Dam, no one predicted that we would be having flooding this year, and that happened in the last couple months. So,
and just because it's on there from your budget last year, your actual winter was 2.2 million, and your budget was 2, so you pulled 182,000 out of reserve that year.
All right, Councillor Culhane is not able to be with us today because she had scheduled a trip and she's out of the city, but she did ask me to just make sure that on the record some of her comments. Councillor Culhane has been a long opponent to the conversion process of apartments to condominiums, and she is continued to be concerned about this going forward, and she wanted that on the record. We've had, last term, we had a few applications that came through the Planning committee that were turned down. And as Councillor Millette mentioned, tenants continue to be opposed to this, and there are some concerns. The other thing she wanted me to talk about was the fact that honesty and transparency from the provincial government is lacking, in her opinion, that this process of reducing the ratio, which had been accepted before, that suddenly is not being accepted, is being done on the backs of the municipality, and that is not an honest and transparent process where we're working as partners. And so she had that concern. So I wanted to get those both those things on the record. I hope I did justice to her comments to me, but we have that. And then just for my comments, and I've heard a lot about the fact that people around the table, and I'm not trying to be critical, but the comment is made that we're not for tax increases. Actually, we are for tax increases, because to run a municipality with a balanced budget in an era where we have rising costs require tax increases. I think what we're not for is irresponsible or excessive tax increases. We're trying to operate the business of the city and the expansion of our city reasonably and fairly, and so no one around this table likes this. We came in with a reasonable budget this year, we felt, and staff went and put the work of implementing that budget into place. April the 30th, we approved tax rates, and then since April 30th and May the 9th is when the problem occurred, and now we're having to deal with it. So the provincial government is the cause of this problem. Very clearly, they deserve to wear this, and this is not the end of it for us, though. We have to be careful. I am concerned that no matter what we do today, that still this summer or this fall we may have to have a supplemental tax bill because of further downloading. And so while today we're dealing with the tax ratio issue that I think we're going to correct next year, so this won't continue to happen very clearly, but we're not sure what is still in store for us as we work. It's going to be very easy. I know a recorded vote is being called on this matter. It's very easy to say that you're against this when it's going to pass. And it's very easy to go on the record and have your vote recorded as saying, I voted against it, I'm the only one that did it. Certainly in the past, I have been able to vote against motions that I felt strongly with. But we all voted for the budget earlier this spring as well. And this is not an increase in spending. This is the exact same budget. At the end of this vote, regardless of the outcome, and regardless if it is unanimous or if people are voting against it, it is a decision of council, and it reflects on all of us, including Councillor Culhane, who's not here today. So, clearly it's not easy. This is difficult. I appreciate the advice and direction that council gave us to prepare for today. I know that we're going to take some shots because people are going to look, as Councillor Williams said, they don't really care about the reasons, they're just dealing with the reality. But that's why we volunteered to seek these positions and to be here. Sometimes we have to make choices that are not good. There's no good choice here. It's just a varying level of bad choice. And so, I'll be supporting this proposal. I know it's a recorded vote, and I'll ask the clerk to take the vote.
Councillor Millette?
Yes.
Councillor McCaw?
Yes.
Councillor Sanderson?
Yes.
Councillor Thompson?
Yes.
Councillor Williams?
Yes.
Councillor Carr?
No.
Councillor Kelly?
Yes.
Mayor Panchuk?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Anything else we need on this, Director Cousins? This is good. All right. Motion to rise and report, moved by Councillor Carr, seconded by Councillor Sanderson. All in favor? It's carried. First reading of bylaws, 2019-99. A bylaw to adopt the estimates for the sums required during the year 2019 for the general and special purposes of the City of Belleville, and to establish rates to be levied for the same for the residential, multi-residential, new multi-residential, commercial, landfills, new construction commercial, industrial, new construction industrial, managed forest, and pipeline property classes. Moved by Councillor Kelly, seconded by Councillor Thompson. All in favor? Carried. Second reading and discussion on bylaw number 2019-99. Moved by Councillor Sanderson, seconded by Councillor McCaw. Any discussion? All in favor? It's carried. Third and final reading of bylaw number 2019-99, moved by Councillor Kelly, seconded by Councillor Millette. All in favor? It's carried. A confirmatory bylaw, that bylaw number 2019-100, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its special meeting held on May 15, 2019, be read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed this 15th day of May 2019. Moved by Councillor McCaw, seconded by Councillor Sandison. All in favor? It's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Carr and Councillor Millette. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice weekend.